Now let me have a brief introduction to the life and works of John Keats. John Keats was born on the northern outskirts of London in October 1795, the son of Thomas Keats, a stable keeper, and Frances Jennings, daughter of the owner of the stables. In 1803, Keats entered John Clark's school at Enfield, about 10 miles north of London. The school was small, with only about 75 boys in attendance. But surprisingly, it had a wider curriculum than such prestigious public school as Eton, and its rural location may fostered Keats' love of nature. In 1804, John's father was thrown from a horse and died from a skull fracture, leaving 4 small children behind. His mother then married a bank clerk, whom she soon left, but her second husband sold the stables, and the 4 Keats children were left without a home. They were sent to live with their maternal grandparents. Keats had 3 siblings, George, Thomas, and Frances Mary. In 1805, Keats' grandfather died, leaving the children without a male protector. And Keats' mother seems to have dropped out of their lives, so their grandmother, Mrs. Jennings, took them into her house. In 1808, Keats' mother returned to her children, but unfortunately he became seriously ill and died of tuberculosis in 1810. At school, Keats developed a love of reading. In his last 2 or 3 terms at Enfield, he won several prizes and even began a prose translation of Virgil's Aeneid. At this time, he made a friend of Carlton Clark, 8 years his senior, who had been his tutor in his first years at Enfield. Clark was instrumental in fostering a love of music and poetry in Keats. After the death of his mother, Keats' grandmother set up a trust fund for the children. However, the sum involved was not great, and Keats and the other children remained in highly straitened circumstances for years to come. In 1810, Keats left school and became apprentice to Thomas Hammond, a surgeon and apothecary. Although Keats was apprenticed to an apothecary, he soon realized that writing was his true talent, and he wanted to become a poet. Not until he was 18 did he become deeply interested in poetry. In 1813, Keats first read the poetry of Edmund Spenser. He was captivated by it and set to imitate Spenser. So Keats has often been compared to Edmund Spenser in his richness of description. And this is Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen in Keats' collection. In 1815, Keats entered Guy's Hospital in London for medical training for 6 months. He was an industrious student and was quickly promoted to dresser at the hospital. In July 1816, Keats passed his examinations and was qualified to practice as an apothecary and a surgeon. Keats' career at Guy's Hospital had been a successful one, but his fascination with poetry was stronger. With the support of his small inheritance, he devoted himself to writing. Keats' first poem, To Solitude, was published in the journal Examiner in May 1816. That same year, Keats also wrote his sonnet on first looking into Chapman's Homer, and met many noble literary figures, including Shelley. Keats began associating with artists and writers, including Leigh Home, a central figure of the Romantic movement in England, a poet, a translator, and the editor of the influential magazine Examiner. It was Leigh Home who published Keats' first poem, To Solitude, in the magazine in May 1816. And this is the page of the Examiner containing Keats' To Solitude. And this is the first draft of the sonnet on first looking into Chapman's Homer in Keats' collection. In 1817, Keats had abandoned his plans for a medical career and published his first book, Poems. And this year, he also made famous literary critical comments in his letters written to his friends and to his brothers. In 1818, his brother Tom also fell ill with tuberculosis, and Keats nursed him. That same year, he fell in love with Fanny Brawne, a neighbor's daughter, but he was prevented from marrying her by his poor health and financial difficulties. Within a few years, Keats had also experienced the first symptoms of tuberculosis, the disease that had killed his mother and would also kill his younger brother. In 1819, Keats wrote most of his greatest poems at this time, including all of his major odes, To a Nightingale, On a Grecian Urn, To Autumn. In 1820, he developed tuberculosis, and he was nursed by Fanny Brawne and her mother. But Keats published his final work, Lamia, Isabella, The Eve of St. Agnes, and other poems, which included his famous odes and the unfinished narrative, Hyperion, the Fragment. And this is the title page of the copy of Lamia given by Keats to Fanny Brawne. Hoping to prolong his life, Keats took his doctor's advice and sailed for Italy in September 1820. But the strain of the voyage worsened his condition, and he died in Rome the following spring at the age of 26. This is the Towers where Keats spent the last night in England, and this is the house in Rome where Keats died. Okay, so much for the life of John Keats.